Let me start with something that sounds normal until you really look at it. Some people cannot stop, not because life demands it, not because the work requires it, but because somewhere along the way, stillness stopped feeling like rest and started feeling like danger. And staying busy, filling every hour, accepting every obligation, moving from one thing to the next without pause, became the only way they knew how to feel safe inside their own life. This is not about ambition. This is about avoidance, dressed in the most socially acceptable costume ever created. From the outside, always being busy looks like drive. It looks like discipline. It looks like the kind of person who has it together, who contributes, who matters. The world praises them for it. People say things like, "I don't know how you do it all," and "You are so dedicated," and "I wish I had your energy." And the busy person smiles and says something modest and adds another thing to the list. But from the inside, it feels different. It feels less like ambition and more like necessity, less like a choice and more like a compulsion, less like moving towards something and more like staying ahead of something, something quiet, something patient, something that has been waiting for years for the schedule to finally clear. Because here is what busyness does that nobody talks about. It makes the inside of a person very difficult to hear. The noise of a full life, the meetings, the obligations, the plans, the deadlines, the constant low hum of things that need doing drowns out the quieter signals. The grief that was never processed, the question that was never asked, the feeling that sits just beneath the surface of every busy day, waiting for 5 minutes of genuine stillness to finally rise up and be felt. And for some people, that is exactly the point. The busyness didn't start as avoidance. It rarely does. It started as necessity, a genuinely full period, a demanding season, a time when there really was too much to do and not enough hours. And during that time, the busy person discovered something. That when you are moving fast enough, certain things cannot catch you. Certain feelings cannot find their footing. Certain questions cannot get enough silence to form themselves into words. And the discovery was not conscious. It was just something the nervous system filed away. Moving feels better than stopping. A full day feels safer than an empty one. The schedule is not just a schedule. It is a structure. And structure, for people who learned early that the world inside them was not safe to inhabit, is a form of protection. One of the deepest psychological roots of compulsive busyness is something called experiential avoidance. It is the practice, almost always unconscious, of filling the hours so completely that the uncomfortable interior has no room to breathe. And what makes it so persistent, so difficult to see from the inside, is that the culture rewards it. The person who drinks to avoid their feelings is recognized as someone who needs help. The person who works 16 hours a day to avoid the same feelings is recognized as someone with exceptional work ethic. The avoidance is identical. The response is completely different. What is being avoided is different for everyone, but there are things that appear again and again. Grief that was put aside during a difficult time and never returned to, not because the person didn't care, often because they cared so much that stopping to feel it felt impossible, so they kept moving, and the grief went underground, but not away. It settled somewhere beneath the full calendar and the impressive output and the relentless forward motion, waiting for the first real silence. A question about the life, a quiet, persistent, deeply uncomfortable question about whether this is the life they actually chose, or simply the one that accumulated while they were too busy to ask anything different. Whether the career is theirs, whether the relationships are nourishing, whether the version of themselves that exists in constant motion is the real one, or a very convincing performance of one. And sometimes, beneath all of it, something even simpler and more frightening than either of those things. The fear that if they stop, if they really stop, and sit alone with themselves in genuine quiet, what they find there will not be enough. That without the doing, without the producing, without the contributing, there will be a question about who they actually are that they are not ready to answer. There's also something that lives in this pattern that is rarely named out loud. For many people who are always busy, rest does not feel like rest. It feels like failure, like laziness, like the absence of the productivity that makes them worth something. Because somewhere in the history of how they were shaped, in homes where love came with conditions, where approval was tied to performance, where being useful was the price of being welcome, they internalized a belief that they must earn their right to exist. And that belief does not feel like a belief. It feels like the truth. It feels like just how things are. The person does not think, I am staying busy because I believe I must earn my worth. They think, I am staying busy because there is a lot to do. And there is always a lot to do. Because when your value depends on productivity, the list never ends. It was never meant to end. It was meant to keep you moving. Many people who are always busy are running from pain. Not as a metaphor, as a literal, daily, practiced act of outrunning something that has been gaining on them for years. A grief unprocessed, a loss unmourned, a version of themselves they left behind somewhere on the path to becoming capable and productive and fine. The busyness keeps them moving fast enough that the pain cannot quite catch up. And as long as they keep moving, they do not have to feel how close behind it actually is. The tragedy is not that they are running. The tragedy is that they are exhausted from running, genuinely, deeply exhausted in a way that no vacation or achievement or finished project will ever resolve. And they cannot stop, because stopping means turning around, and turning around means finally seeing what has been following them all this time. What makes this so invisible from the inside is that it looks exactly like a full and successful life. The busy person is not struggling visibly, they are thriving visibly, or performing the version of thriving that their world recognizes and rewards. Their calendar is proof of their value. Their exhaustion is worn as a badge of commitment. And the pattern continues not because they lack awareness, but because the busyness itself consumes the only thing that awareness requires: time, silence, the margin in which it becomes possible to look at the life instead of simply living it at full speed. The path forward is not about doing less for the sake of it. It is not about productivity shame or performing rest as its own new obligation. It is about something quieter and more personal than either of those things. It is about creating, deliberately, uncomfortably, against every habit that has kept the hours full, enough stillness to hear what has been trying to surface. Not because what surfaces will be easy, it often is not. The grief that has been outrun for years does not arrive gently when the running finally stops. The question about the life is not comfortable to sit with. What makes this so invisible from the inside is that it looks exactly like a full and successful life. The busy person is not struggling visibly. They are thriving visibly, or performing the version of thriving that their world recognizes and rewards. Their calendar is proof of their value. Their exhaustion is worn as a badge of commitment. And the pattern continues not because they lack awareness, but because the busyness itself consumes the only thing that awareness requires: time, silence, the margin in which it becomes possible to look at the life instead of simply living it at full speed. The path forward is not about doing less for the sake of it.
It is not about productivity shame or performing rest as its own new obligation. It is about something quieter and more personal than either of those things. It is about creating, deliberately, uncomfortably, against every habit that has kept the hours full, enough stillness to hear what has been trying to surface. Not because what surfaces will be easy, it often is not. The grief that has been outrun for years does not arrive gently when the running finally stops. The question about the life is not comfortable to sit with. But the thing being avoided is almost never as catastrophic as the avoidance implies. The grief, when it is finally felt, is survivable. And more than survivable, it is often the beginning of the most honest period of a person's life. The question about the life, when it is finally asked in genuine stillness, does not destroy the life. It gives it back to the person who has been living it on autopilot, in motion, too busy to notice that another way was possible. Because people who are always busy are not incapable of stillness. They are not shallow, they are not without depth or feeling or the desire for something quieter and more real than the schedule they maintain. They are people who found at some point in their becoming that motion was safer than stillness, that a full life was a more manageable experience than an empty afternoon with nowhere to hide from themselves. And they have been honoring that finding ever since, dutifully, exhaustingly, impressively, long after the conditions that made it necessary have changed, long after the environment that taught them to earn their worth has been left behind, long after the pain they are running from has become less dangerous than the running itself. The busyness was never the problem. It was the solution to something that was never given another way to be addressed. And the question that changes everything is not, how do I become less busy? It is, what have I been too busy to feel? That question, asked honestly and quietly in whatever small pocket of stillness can be found, is not comfortable. It is not easy. It does not have an answer that arrives immediately or neatly or without difficulty. But it is real, and it is theirs. And sitting with it, just sitting without filling the silence, without reaching for the next thing, is the first genuinely still moment many of these people will have allowed themselves in years. And in that moment, something important becomes possible. Not a solution, not a resolution, just the beginning of finally being present inside a life they have been running through for a very long time, without stopping to ask if it was taking them somewhere they actually wanted to go. That is not a small thing. That is everything.